I'm going to start by giving some more background, but kind of going through, for me, it's a little bit of a timeline, but it doesn't have to necessarily be like, a linear timeline of my personal mental health journey that basically has led me to where I am today and still ongoing, of course. And then I'll ask Joyce too, and then Ashley will share as well. And that could be as long or as brief as you like. And then I think no more structure, we'll just start talking and we'll just get into it, which is the part I'm most excited for. So yeah, I'm gonna try to be brief with my story, but we'll see. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is from when I was a child and I was in probably elementary school, and every so often I would have this experience where I would go down to eat breakfast before going to school, and I didn't really realize it happening, but all of a sudden I was really shaky and my heart was racing. And as a kid, I didn't know what was going on. And so I just got scared and the feeling would get worse. And I remember like kind of voluntarily like collapsing on the floor, like just like lying down on the floor basically, because I feeling sick and trying to catch my breath and being nervous, thinking I can't breathe. And my parents, wanted to help. And of course, they didn't think, my mom has a whole history of anxiety and even panic attacks, but didn't think that would be present in a child, I guess. And so I ended up going to like a heart doctor and getting like my heart checked out, and everything was fine. And so it kind of was left a bit unresolved, even though it happened, more than once. And it might have stopped for a little bit, or I don't know, I might have just not talked about it very much, even with my family. And that was mostly because I myself didn't understand. And meanwhile, I also had a lot of social anxiety. So I was like, I could get really, if I was really comfortable with someone, I would like talk a lot, but mostly I was just very shy and like embarrassed to talk to people. And I would also randomly just throw temper tantrums, probably at too old of an age, and kind of just dealing with all of those things. Okay, so years later, as I was actually having more panic attacks, I realized, oh my God, that's what was happening when I was a kid. Like I was having a panic attack. And so that was like the first kind of big realization. And I ended up having some doctors that I didn't find to be the best. And I was on the medicine Paxil for a while because that was what my mom was on. It's an SSRI. It works really well for my mom. My sister has OCD and she's on Luvox, and that works really well for her. So I basically was just like put on it for years and like not much else. And I thought maybe it was helping. But then like post-college now, the panic attacks actually were coming back and getting worse. And I was having like a full-blown panic attack like twice a week. And I was like, oh God, okay, something needs to change. This is really, I can't live with this. And that is when I dove into more of trying to figure out how to understand myself. Like, why is this happening? What's going on? I saw a therapist, and just in general, like as much resources as I could to try to figure it out. And I was able to overcome that. I got to the point where I can catch the panic or the anxiety in the very beginning, and I can stop it, and because I understand it and that it's not actually hurting me before it cycles out of control and goes into a panic attack. And I went from, having them like twice a week at its worst to really not having one in probably maybe 2 years or something like that. So that's really great. And after that, more recently, I wasn't having the panic attacks, but I was still having a lot of anxiety. And we're getting closer to present day now, so I'm almost done. But I was noticing more of the anxiety coming back, and also these cycles where I would go into this like almost mania. I felt like my thoughts, I had all of these thoughts, and I would be like happy, but I'd have all of these thoughts bouncing around in every direction at once, and I couldn't control them. And it was really uncomfortable. And then I would go from that to maybe feeling a little balanced, but then feeling kind of low. And I wouldn't say super low, but definitely just like tired and sad and just not like myself. And so, and meanwhile, I'm also like still struggling with a longstanding eating disorder that nobody has ever tried to relate to my mental health or connect to anxiety or OCD or anything. So about a year ago, I found a new doctor, and she's a therapist and a psychiatrist, and she's really wonderful. And the first thing she did was diagnose me with ADHD, which it just made a lot of sense. And so that was like a huge moment and kind of like the next step to go forward. And not only did she do that, but she said that it's really common for patients to the connection between ADHD and eating disorders and this like idea of perfectionism. And I had never heard anything like that before. So that was really interesting. And since then, I'm on, I take Adderall now for the ADHD, and it calms me down and lets me take one thought at a time and makes me feel balanced. Sometimes I do talk way too much when I'm on it a little bit, but I feel really calm, which is amazing. And just, I talk to her every week, and like, I feel like I've evolved more in the last year than ever before in my life. I will quickly acknowledge that we are in the not the middle anymore, hopefully near the end of the COVID pandemic. So it's interesting that I've had this evolution in like COVID, pandemic quarantine. But we've all kind of been through our own journeys, I think, the past year. So there's that. So I'm going to stop talking. That was maybe too long, but I'm at a place now where I'm like building confidence and understanding and thinking existentially and just like evolving kind of every day and every week. And I just, I feel more balanced than ever before, but at the same time, I'm excited to see what comes next and where I go next. So, okay, that's my journey. Joyce, if you wouldn't mind to share yours. Thank you.
So thanks for sharing that, Sam. And I know like talking about mental health is not always the easiest thing to do, but it is very liberating, I think, once you can talk about it. So my journey is very different. My diagnosis and what I suffered from was major depression. And like Sam, I'm sort of like on like the like come out of the woods kind of. I'm in a very good place right now, but it's something that I know is like always there, and I'm like aware of it. And I think now I'm not that afraid of it anymore. But for me, the big thing was that I was an extremely high functioning person, and my outward sort of like image was very, driven, motivated, gregarious, active. And so no one really even thought that I could be depressed. And also, I think for a lot of people with depression, it's like you feel that way, and there's no real like reason you feel that way, and so you kind of invalidate your own feelings, being like, well, I don't have a reason to be depressed, and so I'm not depressed. It's not real. Like, I'm just being a baby. Like, get over it. And so I think a lot of my like, like hard work like motivation kind of came from that place, like just like get over it, just do something, like kind of place. But like you, Sam, I now that I understand it, I look back and I was like, wow, like I've been this way since I was like very little. And I guess the most toxic way in which my depression manifested was that I constantly had like suicidal ideation and fantasies. I distinctly remember when I was a child, and I was probably like 7 or 8 years old, and I learned what the word suicide meant that day. Like I remember that day, and I remember thinking like, you can do that? Like, wow. Like not like a like, oh, that's terrible, but I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a way out kind of. And like now looking back, like that sounds crazy that like an 8-year-old kid would be like, whoa, I get like I can die anytime I want. Like I laugh, but it's kind of like it's just it goes against like our biology. You know, like when I hear stories about people when I was in like my deep depression, and we hear a story about people like doing crazy things to like survive. You know, that guy let like cut his arm off, or people who are in like really, really deplorable, like horrific conditions, and they like fight tooth and nail to come out. I'm just like, why? Like, I would just give up. Like, what's the point? Um, and so I was very, I think, ashamed of how I was feeling because one, I didn't think there was like an actual reason for me to feel this way. I lived a very privileged life. I had very loving and supporting family. And so, yeah, I constantly invalidated my own feelings, and I got really, really good at hiding how I felt. Um, and so, yeah, I my sort of recovery from this. I mean, a lot of things happened that influenced sort of my mental health journey in college, but I guess the straw that broke the camel's back kind of was a very toxic romantic relationship that I had. And when it ended, I kind of looked back and was like, why did I do that to myself? Like that was terrible. Like why did I put up with that for so long? And so I started going to therapy more just because like I was like, oh my ex-boyfriend sucks. So like I need to fix this. It's like it was I like really didn't understand like what I was doing. I was just like, something's wrong. And so, you know, it started off, I went to therapy and I would talk about my ex-boyfriend or like whoever I was dating at the time. And I would talk about, you know, like arguments I had with my parents or whatever. And this entire time, I still have suicidal ideation, but I never told anyone. Like, not even, and I'm not a very secretive person. Like, none of my close friends knew. I never told anyone, not a single soul. And then, you know, things kept getting, I think therapy for some people, it can kind of be like, sort of cleansing the festering wound. Like, you kind of have to like get worse before you get better. And so as we were digging deeper and deeper and deeper, I was getting like more and more and more depressed, I think, because I was like realizing more of it. And finally, like sort of in my lowest moment, I told my therapist, well, actually, it's interesting. One of the first questions she asked me, like when she was sort of, I guess, like triaging me or like trying to figure out where to start was like, do you ever have thoughts about harming yourself? And I paused and I was like, no. And she was like, well, why did you wait so long to say that? And I was like, oh no, I don't. And then later on, like like after like a year and a half, I finally was like, yeah, like I have like a passive death wish that sometimes becomes a very active death wish. And that's when she was kind of like, why haven't you told me this? And I was like, well, I was afraid you were going to judge me. And she's like, I'm your therapist. Like, it's my job to not judge you. And that's when I was introduced to a psychiatrist, and I started taking medication. The first one I tried didn't work for me, but then eventually we landed on Wellbutrin, which has been a godsend. But the sort of the pharmacological approach is definitely just half of the story. Like the other half of my journey was confronting my issues and like especially opening up to my family about it, because there was a lot of hurt there from my family, but it wasn't like because they weren't loving or supporting. It's because there wasn't a communication, and so they were hurting me in ways that they didn't understand because they just assumed that I was happy all the time. And so kind of opening that line of communication up with my family, and then like with my parents and my siblings and stuff, that really helped. And so yeah, now I'm at a place where I kind of like understand my depression, and it doesn't come back that frequently anymore. I think the medication helps with that, but on days that it does, I kind of understand it. And I've, I've been practicing like mindfulness, and I've been, other strategies that people use to sort of to take care of their own mental well-being, and all of that has helped. And so, yeah, that's sort of where I'm at in my journey right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, thank you. Ashley, whatever you would like to share.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you both for sharing those stories. It's always so fascinating to me to talk about mental health, because I don't know if you guys are like this, but I love intellectualizing all of my emotions. Like I love being able to pinpoint things and connect dots. So like when you talk about it, it's very like it feels less severe than when you're actually going through it. And so it's just fascinating for me to like kind of process all of that while I even think about my own journey. But my journey is similar and different in a lot of ways. I mean, the journey is individual for everyone, so I think that's where it feels different. But I have still not quite figured out when it started for me. I suffer from depression and anxiety, although similarly feel like I am in a better place now and know how to manage it and know my go-tos whenever I feel like something's, flaring up or what have you. But I think if I can pin it back to something, so my family was in a really traumatic car accident when I was 13. Almost lost my mom and my brother, but everyone is alive and healthy, so it's good. But that kind of, I know for my mother, she suffered from PTSD from that accident, both mostly depression, but anxiety as well. And growing up at the time, it was kind of like we knew something was happening, but we didn't know what was happening. And I think my dad kind of just whisked her away whenever something happened, and we would kind of just be left to like, okay, like keep it together, and it's interesting. It's something that my therapist now is trying to unpack with me. And I've been going to years of therapy, on and off, and it's finally now coming up, because similar to Joyce, it was always like, oh, like that ex-boyfriend, or like he's the worst, like let's talk about that. It's like, oh, like my roommate pissed me off today, like things like, we never really kind of dug into it. And the first time we did, I remember, like, it was over 15 years ago, but the first time we talked about it when I talked about it with my therapist, I just bawled, because it's just all of these emotions that from that age on, I was just like told to push down, keep moving forward, focus on school, focus on sports, like your life is fine, and it was fine and privileged and blessed in a lot of different ways. But I never really kind of dealt with, what like the trauma from that event. And I think coupled with kind of from a, you know, we're all really high achievers, and from a very early age, we're told like, be the best, do more, you can do more, like, and you just kind of keep grinding, and like the education system is kind of built on that in this country. And you know, it's just, I know for me, what it really snapped, um, when I started working in the real world, like right after college. Um, and in kind of like the year or two after college, that's when things started getting really bad for me. I had actually moved out to California, and my parents finally had to be like, you need to move back to the East Coast because you're not surviving. Like, you're really, really depressed right now. And it was interesting because, in fact, I was still in a headspace where I was like, I'm fine. Everything is fine. I just need it. Similar to Joyce, like, put your head down and keep moving. Like, you're fine. Um, and it was actually my parents that were like, you are not fine. And it wasn't like they came out and yanked me or anything, you know, like I got a new job and like did it in a way that I felt comfortable doing it. I think the move back from California was really interesting because before I left, it was a lot of like, you're gonna live the dream, you're never coming back, like you're getting off you're going to California. And I was like, the whole time, I was like, I'm coming back, you guys. Like, you know. And so then when I did finally come back, I felt like a failure. I felt like I was letting the world down. I like didn't tell anyone I moved back, like very, very subtly told a few people, and like whoever picked up on it, picked up on it. And so when I came back to DC, that's when it was actually my parents who encouraged me to get on medication. So I took escitalopram, which I think is the generic brand for Lexapro. And something interesting that I was picking up in your all's conversations was um, just like things related to family members. And I think, Sam, you were talking about it, but there's actually, and Joyce, you can probably tell me because you're a real life scientist, there's evidence that medication that works for your family members works for you. So that was something that ran true for me as well. And it was interesting because I also didn't realize that I had both depression and anxiety. It was like I was handling one and then the other one flared up and I was like, whoa, I don't know what's happening to me right now. But I laugh about it because I think that's another coping thing for me. I just laugh everything off. But it was bad. I also went through suicidal ideation, and you get to those moments, and I was thankful and lucky enough to have parents that I could lean on and support on through a lot of it. And it just sucks because like you see how much pain they feel seeing you go through it. And then it kind of is just like a self-fulfilling prophecy because then you just feel worse and you're like, no, I'm trying, like I can get it together, you know. But I think, you know, now that I think about it, it's like the medication therapy. I'm happy to say I am able to be off of medication now. So I've figured out different coping strategies that really, really help when things do feel like they're flaring up. But a few things I've noticed about myself: I bury myself in work and activities. Just to not feel things. And then I get overwhelmed because that's what humans do, right? And I think it's been an interesting journey. I think there's still a lot more I'm trying to figure out. But I think if I could wrap it all up, at least for me, it's a combination between this obsession with perfectionism, and being the most, doing the most, whatever, like growing up that way, coupled with the trauma from the accident and this just like very real fear of abandonment and like not being worthy or deserving of love, and like just being so afraid of like losing people. And so like for me, relationships do end up being a big trigger, because I think that's just how I internalized it when I was a kid. But again, this is why I pay a therapist to help me figure out why I feel the way that I feel. But yeah, I feel like whenever I talk about this, I always sound so disjointed and like, well, this happened, and this happened, this happened. But I think that's the reality of it. I think there's, by the time you're actually talking to a professional to understand why you feel the way you feel, and like putting up safeguards for yourself, a lot of the work ends up being, or twofold. One is making sure you stay out of that, right? And then or take care of yourself as best as you can. But then I know for me, a lot of it has been like, why, like why, like what happened? And I'm so thankful that like I have the ability to go talk to someone and have friends to talk to it about, to like continue processing and like understanding just like, how do we navigate all of this, I feel like there's still just so much that I don't know.
So much.
Yeah. I'm like, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'm now done. But yeah, it's just a fascinating, I'm glad that like now we're at a point in time where we do all feel comfortable talking about it, because there, even in the last, 10 years, like I don't think I was comfortable talking about it. Like it's, a lot has changed.
A lot's changed.
Hopefully for the good. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashley.